This week, as we head towards summer, President Biden is preparing his first overseas trip, heading to Europe for the G7, a visit with the Queen, and his first summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin, where that spate of cyber attacks targeting our daily life will be at the top of the agenda. Here at home, Biden hasn't given up hope for a bipartisan deal on infrastructure, but he's facing pressure from progressives to go it alone as Republican votes prove elusive. And the latest unemployment report shows that our economy isn't creating quite as many new jobs as expected. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo is standing by to address these issues. First, let's get a better sense of where things stand from our senior White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. And Mary, let's start with those infrastructure talks. The president's set to meet again tomorrow with GOP Senator Shelley Capito, but the two sides are still quite far apart with these deadlines looming.
They are, George. And look, both sides have shown a willingness to budge here, but not nearly enough to reach a deal. They are still far apart on the scope of this plan and how to pay for it. The president has now rejected the latest Republican counteroffer to come up $50 billion in spending, and Republicans have dismissed the president's latest offer to pay for all of this by implementing a 15% minimum corporate tax rate on those companies that now pay little or nothing. Now, the White House will tell you there are no firm deadlines here, but there is a very real sense that time is running out. The president is facing increasing pressure from members of his own party, moderates, who want him to strike a compromise, and those progressive members who are encouraging him to go it alone and do this with just Democratic support. On the Hill, we know they are readying options to do just that. While here at the White House, the president continues to work the phones, reaching out to members of both parties, and tomorrow he will sit down with Senator Capito, the lead Republican negotiator.
And Mary, the administration is also sounding the alarm with these cyber attacks. This week, the FBI director, Christopher Wray, compared the challenge posed by these attacks to 9/11.
And George, the White House views this as an urgent national security threat, even though many of those being targeted are private companies. These hackers have increasingly shown that they are capable of disrupting major parts of American life. And the White House is now urging companies to take action now, saying no company is safe. The president has made clear he feels that Russia bears some responsibility for these bad actors. We know he plans to push Putin on.
Mary Bruce, thanks very much. Let's bring in the Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, right now. Secretary Raimondo, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Let's start with these cyber attacks. 8 attacks every day in the United States right now. They're targeting food, they're targeting gas, they're targeting television, our water supply. Does the government have to do more to force businesses to protect themselves and their customers?
So I think the first thing we have to recognize is this is the reality, and we should assume, and businesses should assume, that these attacks are here to stay and, if anything, will intensify. And so just last week, the White House sent out a letter broadly to the business community urging the business community to do more. The only good news here, George, is that some very simple steps like two-factor authentication, having proper backups and backup technology can be enormously helpful against a wide variety of these attacks. So it is clear that the private sector needs to be more vigilant, by the way, including small and medium-sized companies, and also President Biden has been clear that we are going to do more. In fact, certain components of the American Jobs Plan provide for investments to shore up the nation's cyber infrastructure, which is just another reason why it's so important that the AJP passes.
But should the government be requiring these steps by businesses?
You know, I think that, as I said, at this point, we are urging businesses. Businesses know how to do this. It's relatively inexpensive to do the simpler things like two-factor authentication. And at the moment, we're going to, pursue that versus, what you're talking about, a little bit more heavy-handed approach.
We know that a significant number of these attacks are emanating from Russia. Is it time for the administration to take a more aggressive approach and target the source of these attacks?
Well, as I said, this is a top priority. And again, the president has been clear. We are evaluating all of the options, and we won't stand for a nation supporting or turning a blind eye to a criminal enterprise. And as the president has said, we're considering all of our options, and we're not taking anything off the table as we think about possible repercussions, consequences, or retaliation.
That's the national support. Should we be contemplating military action even if these are private, not government entities?
As I said, all options are on the table. This is a top priority, and all of us in the Cabinet and National Security Council are focused on it and considering all possible consequences. This week, when the President meets with Putin and other world leaders, this will be at the top of the agenda.
Let's talk about the infrastructure talks. The President meeting with, as I said, Senator Capito tomorrow on the infrastructure talks. Is this week do or die for a bipartisan deal?
No, this is not do or die. You know yourself that, the practice of legislating is much more art than science. There's no one better at it than President Biden. I know from my time as governor, it's a messy process. So, no, it's not do or die. There's no, hardwired deadline. We are doing the work of legislating. This is a big week. You'll see in the House this week, Congressman DeFazio is moving forward, starting to legislate on a piece of legislation that incorporates many of the President's priorities. We will also, at the same time, continue our talks with members of the Senate. I can tell you, George, I have spoken with many legislators in the Senate, Republican and Democrat. There is broad desire to have bipartisan agreement. That is good for the country. The President is leading us to, continue to stay at the table. So we won't do this forever, but right now there are good faith efforts on both sides, and we're going to continue the work of, doing our job and trying to get a bipartisan agreement.
As you know, a lot of Democrats have a sense of deja vu. They say this reminds them of the experience, the President Obama's experience with health care back in 2009. He tried and tried and tried for a bipartisan deal. Basically, the clock almost ran out on him. And now progressives like Bernie Sanders and AOC say it's long past time to hold out hope for these negotiations. It's time for Democrats to put this on the floor and pass it on their own.
I hear that. We hear that. The President doesn't agree. This President, no one knows better than President Biden how to work with Congress and move to a bipartisan deal. So at this point in time, we're not there yet. And again, I can just tell you, talking to governors, talking to many, many private sector leaders, talking to senators, Republican and Democrat, folks want a bipartisan deal. If we don't get there, then we'll consider other options. But it's way too soon at the moment to say that. By the way, again, this week, Congressman DeFazio is moving forward. We are seeing progress. I will tell you, if someone told me 2 months ago that we would be talking to Republicans about $1 trillion plus deal and still at the table, I'm not sure I would have believed you. So it's been a month of great progress, and we have to stick with it a bit longer to see what's possible.
Of course, one of the reasons President Biden is trying so hard is that you have Democrats like Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, who are reluctant to support a Democrats-only package. You know you can't pass one without them. Are you confident they're going to come around if bipartisan talks break down?
I think they will. They are very engaged, both of them. They want to do what's right. The thing that everyone understands, and the President has been crystal clear about this, is that the red line is inaction, right? We have delayed investments in basic research and development, infrastructure improvements, job training, provision of child care for so long that no matter who I talk to, Republican, Democrat, business leader, labor leader, everyone says it is time to make these investments. It is past time to make these investments. So, yes, I think at the end of the day, there is commitment that inaction is unacceptable, and we will get something big done for the American people that meets the moment and that makes these investments so that we can compete, so that we can thrive, so that we can, create the millions of jobs that the President's vision and package will enable to be created.
Finally, President Biden signaled on Friday that at least some of the temporary unemployment benefits should expire in September. Republicans like Kevin McCarthy have been saying we have to stop paying people not to work. Have the extended benefits held back hiring?
We hear it anecdotally, but I would say there's no evidence that they have significantly held back hiring. Here's what we do know. Those extended benefits have been a lifeline for Americans who have been struggling. They have meant the difference between someone being able to pay the rent or being homeless, someone being able to feed their children or their kids going hungry. And look, the jobs report on Friday was a good report. Long-term unemployment going down, wages going up. 2 million jobs created in this president's term so far, the most jobs created ever in the first few months of a presidency. So they will expire in September, and, you know, I think the economy will continue to strengthen. But make no mistake about it, though they were necessary, and they were a lifeline for Americans for the past several months during this pandemic.
Secretary Raimondo, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you.
We turn now to that news from Facebook on Friday that President Trump will be suspended from the platform for at least 2 years, punishment for his provocation of the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Trump addressed the ban when he returned to the political stage in North Carolina last night.
Zuckerberg, it's another beauty. But they say they may allow me back in 2 years. No, I'm not too interested in that. They may allow me back in 2 years. We got to stop that. We can't let it happen. So unfair. They're shutting down an entire group of people. Not just me. They're shutting down the voice of a tremendously powerful, in my opinion, a much more powerful and a much larger group.
Let's get a response now from Facebook's Vice President for Global Affairs, Nick Clegg. Nick, thanks for joining us this morning. You heard President Trump right there. What's your response?
Well, look, of course, we understand that making a decision like this is controversial. It's shouted at, if you like, from both sides, from those people who feel that Donald Trump should be back on the platform immediately, and from those who say he should be banned forever. It receives criticism from all sides. But, you know, in a sense, our job is not to take these decisions with an eye to, you know, which side of the political aisle is going to agree or disagree more with us, but just to do so in a way that is fair, transparent and proportionate, in line with our rules, and crucially is responsive to the comments and criticisms that Facebook received when we first suspended Donald Trump from Facebook from the Independent Oversight Board, who said about a month ago, when looking at this case, they said, look, Facebook was right to suspend Donald Trump because of the exceptional, very grave circumstances in early January on the Capitol, but that Facebook was wrong to do so in an indefinite way, in an open-ended way, and that we needed to come up with clearer due process, clearer standards, clearer penalties, which we've now done. We've now set out what penalties would apply to what I hope will remain these very rare cases where a public individual uses our apps and services to say things in a way which foments, or in his case, praises rioters who were involved in violence ongoing at that very time. And we've now laid out those penalties and explained why we think in this particular case the most severe penalty is justified. That's a 2-year penalty. The timetable, I should stress, starts from early January, so expires in January 2023. And I don't, as for Donald Trump, of course, we don't expect him to welcome that decision. We do hope, though, that reasonable observers will believe that we are acting as reasonably and proportionately as we can in these very difficult circumstances.
You focused on the comments encouraging the rioters on January 6th. What about the lies about the election? The president repeated a series of those last night. Again, if the president gave the speech he gave last night in January 2023, would the suspension be extended?
Well, it's very difficult for me to make sort of hypothetical sort of judgments, and I haven't heard the full speech. What I can say is that we have a whole, range of tools that we use to deal with misinformation. So we work with fact checkers around the world and demote and label content, whether it's claims about elections or indeed false claims about anything else, which is then clearly labeled for our users so they can see that independent fact checkers have said, look, this is either false or partly false or missing context and so on. So that is something we would apply to people who are not in active office or are not pursuing office as candidates in politics. That is a system which applies to everybody else and would apply in Donald Trump's case as long as he's no longer a candidate. So of course there is action that we take on misinformation, but I've got to be very clear. I don't think anybody wants a private company like Facebook to be vetting everything that people say on social media for its precise accuracy and then booting people off the platform if what they say is inaccurate. We can explain to users that independent fact-checkers might find something to be inaccurate. I don't think they want Facebook to be a sort of truth.
So the bright red line there is encouraging violence, not spreading lies.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got very clear rules. They're called community standards. Everyone can go online to see them. And one of the brightest of those red lines, as you just implied, is that you cannot... It doesn't matter who you are. You can be the Pope, the Queen of England, the President of the United States. You cannot use our services, and I hope most people would think this is reasonable, to aid, abet, foment or praise acts of violence. And that I hope most people would agree is something that we just don't want on social media. Look, the vast majority of content on Facebook is innocent content. It's barbecues, bar mitzvahs, babies. Only about 6% of total content actually is related to politics. So the vast majority of reasons that people come on to Facebook is for good, positive, playful reasons, their kids, their families, their friends, or to run a local business and reach local customers and so on. And so I think it's right that we should be expected to take action where people, in hopefully on the whole rare cases, use our apps and services in a way which could lead to real-world imminent harm.
You hit on this in your previous answer. Is it Facebook's place to really be having this kind of power over political speech? And Kara Swisher in the New York Times raised this question in an op-ed this week. She said, it's obvious we need to discuss whether the decision to live or die online should be in the hands of a corporate executive with no accountability to speak of, all part of a bigger conversation about consolidation of power and what we're going to do to diminish it. As you know, there are growing calls on both the right and the left to break Facebook apart.
Yeah, I don't think actually chopping up a company deals with any of these difficult issues of the role of political speech, incitement to hatred and violence and so on. It doesn't matter whether the company's big or small. Those issues will always be there. So my own view, for what it's worth, is the answer is not break up. The answer is regulation. And to that extent, I strongly agree what that commentator just said, which is, in the end, it's not, American democracy does not belong to Silicon Valley. It belongs to the American people. And the people who should set the rules for how American democracy plays out and where the line should be drawn on what speech is and is not acceptable shouldn't be private companies. It should be legislators and lawmakers in D.C. and around the world answerable to their own people. These are big societal decisions. And look, in the absence of regulation, in the absence of consensus from lawmakers on where we should draw the line, we have tried our best. We're very open about the community standards that we abide by. We've created, it's the first of its kind anywhere, no other Silicon Valley company has done this independent oversight board to hold us to independent account. But all of that, I agree, is an inadequate surrogate for what in the long run we need, which is societal rules set by democratic process, by lawmakers, not by private companies.
Nick Clegg, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Roundtable's next, plus a look at the New York mayor's race from John Carl. Stay with us.
President Trump and I have spoken many times since we left office. And I don't know if we'll ever see eye to eye on that day. But I will always be proud of what we accomplished for the American people over the last 4 years.
Former Vice President Pence in New Hampshire this week, downplaying his differences with President Trump over the course of their partnership. President Trump, of course, returned to the political stage last night as well with that speech in North Carolina. Let's talk about it on our roundtable. We got Rahm Emanuel, Donna Brazile, Wall Street Journal columnist Jason Riley, a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute and author of a new book, Maverick, a biography of Thomas Sowell, and former Libertarian member of Congress, Justin Amash. And Congressman, let me begin with you. The New York Times has an interesting analysis of President Trump this morning. They call him diminished, but dominating at the same time. Of course, he had to give up basically his blog this week. He still has a hold on the Republican Party. You serve with a lot of Republican members of Congress. How do you explain it? What do Republicans do about it?
Well, over the last couple of years, I've really seen it take off. I mean, when I first got to Congress, I could see this nationalist sort of movement starting to swell. And by about 2015, it took hold of the Republican Party in a pretty big way. At first, a lot of these members of Congress, when Donald Trump took office, were doubtful about him. They would make fun of him in private. They'd criticize him. They'd insult him. Even I thought they were going too far, you know, and I was a big critic of Donald Trump, and I couldn't believe some of the things that were said about him. And then around 2 or 3 years ago, around, you know, the beginning of 2019 or so, I saw people really start to shift, and the party really became Donald Trump's party completely. And that's going to be the way it is over the next few years. I don't think we're going back to a different kind of Republican Party.
One of the remarkable things about that, Rahm Emanuel, is usually when presidents are defeated, first-term presidents are defeated, the party tends to abandon them. In this case, it appears that the GOP is doubling down.
Yeah. I want to be the first on this platform. I wanted to be done discussing this man in 2020. I don't want to be doing this. But that said, he will not.
It's reality.
No, it is reality. That said, look, if I were the Democrats right now, and yes, you are right, George, any president goes off and works either on their books or takes a project like Jimmy Carter, Habitat for Humanity, does some other goodwill work. This has always been about Donald Trump. Donald Trump is always about Donald Trump, and that's what he's continuing. But if I were the Democrats, I'd force every Republican right now. Do you believe he will be reinstated? Put him back on the ballot. Because in the swing districts, he is an albatross around the Republican Party. And I would continue. They're trying to flip the cultural issues our way. I flip them right back and make Donald Trump the albatross around the Republican Party, which it is, since he will not let it go.
Jason Riley, what Rahm is referring to there is this talk that President Trump, former President Trump, is telling associates he believes at some level he's going to be reinstated as president, maybe as early as August?
Yes, you hear that talk, you watched the rally last night, George, and then you hear Republican leaders in Congress say, the problem is Liz Cheney. It's ridiculous. You wonder what planet they're living on. There's this hope that Donald Trump will fade away, but that is putting hope above experience. That sounded like a campaign rally to me, what I heard last night. And to Rahm's point, in 2016, Donald Trump won suburbanites, and he won independents. In 2020, he lost both of those groups. That is the Republican Party's problem. They need to get those groups back, and nothing I heard last night is going to help them with those groups.
And he not only lost them in 2020, he also lost them in 2018. And so my view is, the fact is, if he's not going to go, it's an albatross about the Republican Party. I would, for the benefit of the country and the Republican Party, I wish he would disappear. But I would now take this and force the Republicans to answer this question from Senate to gubernatorial to congressional, because it is an opportunity to once again remind them. Joe Biden's message is, we have turned the page on COVID and the economy to a different era. And Donald Trump won't let the past go. So make the Republican Party own the past.
I'm going to press you by posing the question to Donna Brazile. Is that the right strategy, or has there been too much focus by Democrats on Donald Trump?
Democrats can't help but focus on Donald Trump, because he has not only framed what the modern Republican Party looks like, he is also leading the modern Republican Party. I mean, you came to Capitol Hill in 2011 at the height of the Tea Party movement, and then Donald Trump. There's no other playbook right now but to continue to make Donald Trump the central organizing principle that Democrats will focus on, but Republicans need Donald Trump to keep their base intact, to keep the fundraising intact, and also to make sure that they have a strong message for 2022.
But I think this is a mistake for Democrats. I think it's a mistake to keep viewing everything through the Trump lens. Trump is dominating the Democratic messaging, and while the Republican Party may not be growing, maybe it's stuck, you know, it is where it is, I don't think the Democratic Party is growing. Look at the number of people who are saying they're independents now. So as long as Donald Trump is the focus of the Democratic Party and the party is not growing, the Republican Party can still win in a two-party system. I'm trying to change that with the Libertarian Party. But,
you were a lonely voice in the Capitol.
but that's the reality of it. So I think Democrats have to have another message.
I think what's going to play out is, and we saw this Friday, President Biden's going to talk about the economy, talk about managing COVID, and is a distinct turning of the page from the past. That doesn't mean you let Donald Trump just disappear, but the economy will be the focus, as it should be. And the good news for the Democrats, unlike in 1982, 1994, or 2010, where the recession had ended but the recovery had not begun, Democrats will go into the midterm with a strong economy, and the leader of that voice will be Joe Biden. This is what we've done, we got to continue. And there will be a message at the congressional level which will be at the knee level, which is Donald Trump won't let the Republican Party go. And I would just start, it doesn't mean it's dominant right now. Do you believe the president will be reinstated and put the people who don't want, put the Republicans in this vice between not abandoning him and knowing he's costly?
Jason Riley, you brought up the problem for Republicans right now, losing independents, losing suburbanites. On the other hand, Donald Trump was able to cut into the Democrats' majorities with African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans.
Yes. According to the Democratic strategists, the problem here seems to be that as the Democratic Party has taken on more college-educated whites, it's become more progressive, and far more progressive than the black Democrats and the Asian Democrats and the Hispanic Democrats. And the Asian and Hispanic numbers are particularly startling if you're a Democrat. I believe that Donald Trump did better among Asians than any Republican candidate over the past couple decades. So this is a man who went around saying China virus and yet still was able to increase his number among Asians. It's quite remarkable.
Down to Brazil, how big a problem?
It's a problem, but look, Democrats recovered from 2016 when we had a precipitous drop in turnout among those groups. But the challenge in 2022 is that Democrats have to basically do what Joe Biden did in 2020, which is have a singular message on the economy, on the recovery, and to try to make sure that grassroots Democrats are capable of hearing that message and not just listen to the noise, but understand the signal that is coming from the White House. Joe Biden is hugely popular among the Democratic base. He's hugely popular despite all of the Republicans and Libertarians, but he needs to make sure that he delivers on everything that he promised in 2020, and I think Democrats will come back home.
Senator Marsh, with these partisan lines hardening, is there any room for a third way, the kind of third way you said you want to create in Congress?
Absolutely. I think Americans are really tired of this stuff. I think they're tired of two parties that don't get anything done. They look at Washington and these parties just fight nonstop, and one party is about owning the libs, one party is about owning the MAGAs, and there's no real policies being enacted that help the American people. Most of the bills going through Congress end up being messaging bills, or one party dominating the message and running something through roughshod over the other party. So we need a third party. We need a strong third party, because there are independents out there who are looking at this mess and they want something else. What about ending the wars? What about civil asset forfeiture? What about qualified immunity? There are Democrats who talk about this stuff, but the Democratic Party doesn't get any of it done. What about cutting spending and making sure that our tax code is reasonable? We want low taxes, but we shouldn't have a system where there are corporations that don't pay any taxes. Libertarians care about this stuff. The Republicans don't seem to care that much about it. They were spending through the roof and cutting taxes on the biggest corporations while keeping taxes high on a lot of other people.
Rahm Emanuel, the president is trying for a different kind of third way. He's not giving up hope, as you just heard Secretary Raimondo talk about, on getting this kind of bipartisan deal on infrastructure. What do you say to those Democrats who say this is just Lucy in the football? It's never going to happen.
Well, in the White House, you have many roads, and I think first of all, here's conclusion, there's going to be infrastructure. There's going to be an
bipartisan deal?
That's a different question. That is, no, and what I mean by that is everybody's collapsing two arguments into one. There is going to be an infrastructure and dramatic increase in investment, and the president's going to be able to say, we not only created jobs, but we started investing in America again. Number two, how he gets it done. And I think what's happening in the House with Peter DeFazio is Democrats are saying, we have a second track.
That's that appropriations bill Secretary Raimondo was talking about.
And so there's two different tracks. They're both happening simultaneously. I think if you watch the news and, legislative process from both ends of Pennsylvania, they're saying, we don't want to get up from the table, want to do it this way. We offer you every opportunity. I'm not getting up. I thought the president was very smart on the tax proposal, because it makes it harder for the Republicans to say we don't agree with this process. That said, we have an alternative route here. We want you in this, etc. So to me, A, will happen. How it happens is a different question.
The Biden administration's problem is not that they can't get to 60 votes with Republican support. It's that they can't get to 50 votes without Republican support. They don't have their own ducks in a row because moderates like Manchin and Sinema are holding out. And I think the problem here is that Joe Biden's legislative agenda is more ambitious than his mandate justifies it being. He won by not a lot. And he's got a spending agenda out there, a climate agenda out there, I think that far surpasses what the voters want out of him. And now you're seeing where those divisions are. He can't get his own Democrats in order here. So it's not about Republican obstruction here.
If you look at the polls, he actually seems to have the voters with him. He may not have the legislators with him, but Don, I think Jason still brings up an important point right there. Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, Secretary Armando thinks eventually they're going to come around.
Right.
A lot of Democrats doubt that.
Well, I think, first of all, Joe Biden is acting in good faith. He's trying to bring Republicans to the table. He has reduced his overall spending from $2.3 trillion to now $1 trillion. Pete DeFazio is going to move that bill because everyone knows that it's going to expire in September, our transportation authorization, so something will happen. But here's the bottom line. If Democrats don't go big, then guess what? Voters are going to say, come home, because you're not able to deliver. I think at the end of the day, Biden will be able to deliver on his promise to basically upgrade our infrastructure across the board.
This does seem to be the dilemma for the president. He's got to get something done.
Well, honestly, though, the legislative process is not working at all. You know, I just left Congress not long ago. There is no legislative process. I heard the Commerce Secretary say, we've got a legislative process, the legislators are working. They are not working. What we have is a few people, some in the House, some in the Senate. They work on everything. They decide everything. Then they negotiate directly with the administration. And then it gets rammed through with twisting arms. You know, they go and they tell the other members of Congress, hey, get on board or else. There is no discovery process in Congress anymore. And this is a real threat to the American people. This is a real problem for America, that the way we get legislation done nowadays is we stick a Commerce Secretary in a room with some Senate leader. They decide everything, and then they tell everyone, this is the package, take it or leave it. There is no amendment process. In the House, we haven't amended anything since 2016 on the House floor. There's been no process altogether. And this is really dangerous for the United States of America. This is dangerous for the people.
Rahm, you've served in the White House. You've served in Congress. I know you probably disagree with a lot of what the congressman just said there, but
yes.
But at the same time, though, is his analytical point correct? Have we become more of a parliamentary system?
Yeah, well, let me say this. One is the comment that nothing gets done. While I generally agree, we did respond unbelievably well both to the economic recession that COVID created and COVID. So it's a mixed bag. It's not one thing or the other. The second is there is a historical pattern where the legislative process used to be run only by chairmen, has now been consolidated in the Speaker's office, Majority Leader's office, and that is the process that both Democrats and Republicans had happened. And it's not just take it or leave it. There's a lot. If you have only 4-vote majority in the House and no vote, 1-vote majority in the Senate, you cannot run on a just take it or leave it approach. And I think the Speaker has done a tremendous job, and the Senate Majority Leader, in garnering the votes necessary to address the challenges. There are more challenges than what the legislative process is up to at this point. But the idea that they're doing nothing or haven't met the challenge, we are a year after, if you take a look at COVID, with the vaccine developed, distributed on a major system, and we're growing at a faster pace economically and wages growing faster than anybody thought just 12 months ago. So the idea that nothing gets done is not accurate. That there are more challenges that Congress is not meeting is also an accurate description.
There's no amendment process. So that sounds like take it or leave it to me. So, you know, I understand.
Well, don't go into. Listen, you're forming a third party, unsolicited recommendation. Don't go into the battle cry. There is no amendment process. It's just not a caring message for the process. It's just
there is currently no amendment process, and whether Republicans and Democrats think that's okay, I don't think most Americans think that's okay. They send representatives to Washington to represent them. We're going to talk about voting rights, right? People are concerned about voting rights. We're sending members of Congress to Washington who have no say in the process altogether. They're told, this is the piece of legislation, take it or leave it. I can't believe how many times I was handed a piece of legislation. It might be hundreds of pages. You get half an hour to read it. It might be thousands of pages. You get a day to read it. And they say, this is the legislation. You can't change it. You can't amend it. And then people say, oh, well, we care so much about voting rights. Well, people aren't able to represent them in D.C.
One example. Because it's relevant to this conversation, which is health care took 12 months. The idea that there wasn't a legislative process in that is just not true.
And the question in the end, Jason Riley, is how much do people care about process versus what is actually happening in their lives? And the Democrats seem to be betting on the fact that, as Rahm was pointing out, COVID is receding, the economy is rising. That should be good enough.
Well, I don't think that the American people voted for Joe Biden to carry out these spending proposals that he's putting forward, these climate proposals that he's putting forward. I think that's overreach. At the same time that they elected Joe Biden, they also increased the number of Republicans in Congress. They also split the Senate 50-50. And I think that the Biden administration's agenda ought to reflect just how closely divided this country is. He's running like he thinks he has FDR-like majorities, and that he just ran all over his opponent in the election. That didn't happen. And if you look at his agenda, you'd think it did.
No, he ran on a vision of taking his country out of the 1950s and bringing it into the 21st century. That's why the majority of the American people voted for him. While he didn't have coattails at the state and local level, he did run on a very clear picture of how he wanted to transform the economy, how he wanted to deal with racial inequities, how he wanted to deal with climate change. So I think the majority of Americans understood that Joe Biden had a vision. Now, I agree that the sausage making doesn't look as appetizing as some boudin that I've eaten in Louisiana in terms of the legislative process. But the fact that he is trying to move this agenda when Republicans simply have no agenda. Think about it. I mean, the Republicans campaigned on no platform in 2020. The Republicans have basically put all of their eggs in the Donald Trump basket, hoping that it will, produce more chickens.
That is going to have to be the last word today. Thank you all very much. Great discussion. Up next, this year's biggest political race so far is coming soon as voters head to the polls to choose New York City's next mayor. John Carl.